بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي.
Hello and welcome. Today we will talk about defense mechanisms. Defense mechanisms is one of the few things that Freud suggested, but they are still alive. They are still popular and own some value. Let us start with a glimpse of the first lecture about Freud and components of personality. You already know that according to Freud, we have three components of personality. First is it that we call the player principle, and it says, I want it now. Then we have superego. We would call it moral principle, and it says, well, it is not right. And then we have ego, the reality principle, and it tries to accommodate both it and ego. Okay, what will happen if ego is not there and your mind is occupied with it and superego? There will be a conflict, and this conflict will create anxiety, and that anxiety will cause the damage to our mental health. So, now let's see what is anxiety. Anxiety is a negative emotional state associated with threat to the self. And in Freud's theory, it arises when the ego is faced with an invasion of stimuli with which it cannot cope. As a result of either external danger or the demands of either superego, we have anxiety. Hence, during the id superego conflict, ego plays its role to decrease anxiety. Ego settles the dispute between id and superego and manage the conflict. The process or the way ego manages the conflict is called defense mechanism. A sophisticated definition of defense mechanism, according to Freud's theory, could be a technique used by the ego to protect itself from anxiety and the threats which give rise to it. The defense mechanisms are unconscious psychological coping strategies to deal with the anxiety caused by its superego conflict. This is the reason we take defense mechanism as for granted. For example, if I am being disturbed in my office due to misbehavior of my boss, I will definitely not be able to respond. That will cause an anxiety. After the day, I come home and for some minor reason I yell at my children and show aggressive behavior. I may think that I am angry at them for some reason. That is why I am shouting. However, actually, this is the day long anxiety that I was not able to confront with my boss, and that is being displaced now. This is a defense mechanism, and it is called displacement. And it's about seeking satisfaction. Here, I mean aggressive satisfaction through a substitute. There are some other types of defense mechanism that we are going to read in next slides. Repression. Repression is the first mechanism that Freud discovered. It is to keep hurting things away from our conscious thought. And that is possible only if our brain could manage to repress or push them to unconscious. These thoughts are hidden in unconscious and they may cause anxiety and other related psychological issues if they become the part of conscious mind. However, these thoughts are not eliminated. They are at the unconscious level and they keep influencing the personality even if they are not consciously evident. For example, in phallic stage, during the Oedipus Electra complex, the child repressed anger and aggression about the same sex parents. An other example could be the abused person who is unable to recall the event details. For example, an eyewitness of a crime is unable to recall the event. So you can also add hysterical amnesia, that could be another example of repression. In the last couple of decades of 20th century, some of the cases were reported who recovered repressed memories of childhood abuse. According to Freud, we in adulthood do not have an idea if there are repressed thoughts, but our personality is somehow shaped by these repressed thoughts, depending on how much was repressed and what was the intensity. However, today's psychologists, while agreeing that there might be the cases with repressed memories, they also talk about false memories that people are prone to have. Projection. Projection is about attributing our own unacceptable thought and feelings to someone else, such as I hate something about myself, but I find it in another person to attribute myself hate to the other person because I cannot say I hate myself. This will create anxiety. Another example is I hate someone and it does not look nice to hate someone. I cannot say I hate you. So I believe that he does not like me. So this is called projection. Sublimation. Sublimation, you can say, is similar to displacement but in a positive way. We redirect our negative emotions into a constructive way that is socially acceptable. For example, artwork, sports, music, all these activities are constructive and they are socially acceptable. Hence, a mean of redirecting our frustration in a positive direction is called sublimation. Denial. Denial, as the name itself suggests, is about blocking any awareness that can cause anxiety. And we block it by simply denying it consciously. So you see, it is different from repression because now you are denying something consciously. If situation is too bad to handle, a refusal can save us from anxiety. Such as a smoker says smoking is not injurious to health. Now think, if the smoker will admit that the smoking is injurious to health, he will have to leave it and that may be traumatic for an addicted person. Regression. Regression, though not common, but an interesting defense mechanism that Freud suggested. Regression is about taking a step back psychologically and then behaving differently, such as acting younger than your age. It means in some stressful situations, acting in a younger psychological age is a way to get rid of the stress. An old man feeling isolated likes to play like the children. An adult watching children cartoon movies, what do you think about it? And then sucking thumb like a child. Can you relate it with some sort of anxiety? Getting bad grades in the exams and then crying like a child. So these are some of the examples that you can find around you. Rationalization. Rationalization is another defense mechanism that was proposed by Anna Freud. In rationalization, one way or other, our conscious self is involved. Let me ask you a question. And you are supposed to answer yourself as true as possible. Does it ever happen that you distort facts and realities and give excuses to justify yourself as right only because you don't want to accept the unfavorable reality? If your answer is yes, you have practiced this defense mechanism. Rationalization is about giving excuses and justifying only because the acceptance of something may be not favorable and it may be cause of tension for us. For example, I have to work a lot on online teaching. Well, this is not a good idea. Not because I am disturbed or I don't want to do a lot of work this way, but it is not good because all students do not have access to the internet. We cannot assess or examine teaching output properly. Internet is not good enough to upload videos, etc. So I am rationalizing, so-called, to justify why I am not able to, why I don't like to do online teaching. Maybe you remember the example that I gave in the class about the two students who were stuck on the way and because their bikes were punctured, and one of them managed to reach university in time and other did the rationalization that even I can't refuse as a teacher because even if it is not rational to me, it is still plausible. Another example, for example, I am not fat, I am just a big guy. Rationalization. I am not thin, I am just smart. So, another example, to take bribe is okay when I am not being paid sufficient salary and facilities by the government. So, these are quite a few examples of rationalization, and you can find many more in your everyday life. Identification with the aggressor. Identification with the aggressor is another defense mechanism developed by Shandur Frenzy and Anna Fried. Identification with the aggressor is about the victim's way to cope with anxiety by identifying his or herself with the aggressor. The victim takes the aggressor's role, imitates the aggressor's actions, and internalizes the aggressor's behavior. And in this way, there is a hope to avoid abusive behavior, or there is kind of a decrease in abusive behavior. It could decrease the anxiety. A good example is Stockholm syndrome. You can just Google about it, you would find a lot of information about it. Stockholm syndrome is a good example in which the victims develop a psychological alliance with the aggressor by expressing positive feelings towards the aggressor. Have you ever watched in the movies some of the prisoners tend to support the jailer's aggressive behavior towards prisoners and finally are able to get a favor or relief from the jailer? So, this is identification with the aggressor. Reaction formation. Reaction formation is behaving in a way opposite to how we feel. So to say, it is more than denial. A common example someone claims or expresses, a common example someone claims or expresses his or her disliking for someone. He or she is emotionally attached with that person, or just reverse it. For example, I don't like someone, but then I show a kind of attachment with him or her. Well, reflecting Freud, a daughter expressing her love and dedication to her mother may be doing a reaction formation of Electra complex. In fact, she does not like her because she thinks that she's possessive. But she's showing a love and dedication for her mother. That is reaction formation. Dissociation. Dissociation is to detach ourselves from reality and create our own reality to cope with anxiety. This is a way to stay away from the anxiety for a certain period of time, such as daydreaming, getting lost in romantic imagination, some music, movies, or a book. And the primary objective is to lose ourselves somewhere else to feel comfortable. We know the relative will not change, but for a certain time period, we practice the emotional withdrawal. Now you will see some other examples, and from these examples, I have not provided the answers in the examples, so you just need to test yourself what have you learned by now.